German is an awful language. At least that's what Mark Twain thought back in 1880. Now, has it gotten any better? Well, you tell me. There's all those impossibly long words, weird word order rules, and of course, there's the fact that every single noun has a gender that seems to make no sense or to follow no system. Is it really that bad? Well, let's find out. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Willy Badger und das ist Bausteine 1. Herzlich willkommen. Well, let's get it out of the way right from the beginning. There are some rules or maybe patterns that help you recognize the gender of a word. Like, for example, a lot of feminine words end in an E. But there are exceptions. So Mark Twain was kind of right. You do have to learn the gender of the words as you go. And we remember from last week, the definite article, that's any German word for the. It helps us recognize the gender of German subjects when we see or hear it. We look at this list of German nouns, we can quite easily work out which ones are masculine, which are feminine, and which are neuter, just by looking at that definite article. The masculine ones are preceded by der, the feminine ones by die, and all of the neuter subjects just use das. And there is a pattern here, a pattern that becomes a bit more obvious, I think, when we look at the pronouns. Now, pronouns help us refer to things or people without mentioning them by name. In English, it's pretty straightforward. Instead of me saying, for example, that's the city is small, I can say, that's the city, it is small. Now I can use it because you already know I'm talking about the city. It's much the same in German, except we need to remember that things as well as people have a gender. Let's look at some examples using things. Here's the mountain behind Hobart. Das ist der Berg. Heißt Konani. Here's the bridge. Das ist die Brücke. Sie ist lang. And finally, das ist das Meer. Es ist schön. There's a pattern there. Can you see what it is? Now let's just compare the definite articles and the pronouns we use to refer to the nouns. Instead of der Berg, we're saying er. Instead of die Brücke, we're saying sie. And instead of das Meer, we're saying es. In each case, there are similarities between der and er, sie and die, as well as das and es. There are typical endings that we'll meet later when we start using adjectives. Er for masculine, E for feminine, and a form of S for neuter. Well, so far so good. But in these examples, we're always talking about a particular thing. We're using the equivalent of the. And sometimes we just want to say that it is a bridge, one of a few bridges, or maybe that it is a beach and not just the beach. In these cases, we need an indefinite article. Let's see how that works in German with 3 examples. Das ist eine Tür. Das ist ein Schloss. Das ist ein Schlüssel. In each case, the word ein or eine is our indefinite article. So it's the equivalent of a or an. But if we use what we know about those typical gender endings, so er for masculine, E for feminine, and S for neuter, then this doesn't really seem to help us all that much, does it? If we had to guess, we'd perhaps say that eine Tür is feminine because we have that nice E ending on the end. But what about the others? Well, they don't give away anything. And that's it. If we're using the indefinite article for our subjects, then there's no way to tell whether a noun is masculine or neuter. Looking at these examples, the only thing we know for sure is whether they are feminine or not. And sadly, that's just the way it is. But there is one thing that's really easy to learn while we're looking at the indefinite article, and that's negation. Now, I'm going to make some statements about some things, and you need to decide which answer is correct. Use the sentence with ja if you think I'm right, and the one with nein if you think I'm wrong. Here we go. Das ist ein Handy. Das ist ein Buch. Das ist ein Teddybär. Das ist eine Uhr. Das ist eine Kamera. How did you go? Well, you can see that if we want to say that it is not a book or not a clock, then we just put a K in front of the definite article. It's that easy. So maybe German is not so awful after all. Either way, we've learned 3 pronouns today: er, sie, and es. These are the pronouns we use for talking about someone or something. And in the last couple of weeks, we've learned a couple of others too. So let's take a quick look at what we know already. I'm going to break them up into 3 groups because we need pronouns to talk about ourselves, to talk to other people, and to talk about other people. So we know we use ich to talk about ourselves. We also know that we can use du to talk to someone or ask them questions, maybe like wie heißt du or woher kommst du? Here you're talking directly to someone and referring to them with the pronoun du. We'll also know that this is the pronoun we use for talking to someone in our family or a friend maybe. If it's someone we don't know well or someone older than us, then we use the pronoun sie, the only pronoun actually that uses a capital letter. Are there any other pronouns we need to know? Well, yes, there are. If you're talking about yourself and someone else, you need the equivalent of we. And in German, this is wir. So actually fairly similar. And there's the pronoun we use for talking about more than one person. In English, this is they. And in German, it's also rather confusingly sie. This time, however, with a small s. Now, it might seem rather confusing to have the same pronoun for she, the formal you, and they, but of course, you only use a pronoun if it's clear who or what you are talking about. So it actually should be fairly obvious from the context. While we're talking about they, it's worth mentioning that we often use this pronoun in English as a gender-neutral option. And this is not so common in German, but there are quite a few pronouns that people recommend to refer to someone who doesn't identify with either of the binary gender options. And you'll find a list of these in your textbook, along with the information about the indefinite pronoun Mann that I'm not going to touch on today. Well, finally, there's only one other pronoun we need, and it's one we don't officially have in English. Colloquially, people will say use or maybe y'all to make it clear you're talking to more than one person. Well, there's actually a proper pronoun for this in German, and it's ihr, spelled like this, but it sounds like one of these, ihr. So here are all of our pronouns now in German, all of our subject pronouns. And next week, we'll be revisiting the pronouns when we start looking at verbs in more detail. But that's all for now. There's lots more, of course, to practice in your textbook, Bausteine 1. So head over to chapter 3 and get started. And I will see you next time. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.